Alright, hi guys, so I'm back to you with a new video and I hope I'm gonna stop rolling on the fucking chair. In one of my previous videos when I learned Hindi within 5 minutes, I mentioned a question like what is the best way to learn a foreign language? And I said that when you start learning a foreign language, it's better to start with like learning simple phrases, etc. because you build up your knowledge based on what you first learn, but you shouldn't start with complex constructions first, right? But one of the questions that I formed there was like what the best way to learn a language is. Now I kind of want to correct myself because it's not the best formulation or not the most precise formulation you could give there, because technically there is no best way to learn a foreign language, because it always depends on your goals. And I could probably divide my students into 3 categories, like people who need a language certificate, so they prepare for some specific exams, be that IELTS or good certificate or whatever, like depends on the language, right? They need both. They want to learn the language because they are going to study in that language, or they are going to, and they need to pass the exam, the language exam, right? To have the certificate. That's one group. Another group involves working people, people who need a language for their job. And the last group of people would be simply people who want to learn a language for their self-development or because they want to travel. And so you have to understand that based on what your goal is, the intensity of your preparation will be different, right? And so in that case, let's say if you have to prepare for the language exams, right, you should definitely structure your learning, because if you are preparing for IELTS or something and you know you have to have your certificate by the end of the year, I mean, depends on when you start, right? But let's say you say, okay, so in the next year I'm gonna need this certificate, like that's it, right? So that means you have to structure your learning and you have to prioritize your learning. Because you have to see it as it's either I learn it and I pass the language exam or I don't, right? And there is no other way out. And you have to kind of be more strict with yourself. And so try to structure your days, try to structure your month and be like, okay, in 2 months I should be able to get this many points, like when training for that language exam and preparing for that language exam, I should be able to have that many points on that part, right? When preparing at home, right? And now let's say in the other 2 months I would be doing reading or listening, and of course you should be training everything in parallel, because it's not like you learn one thing and then you just magically keep on doing it perfectly, right? Because you can't just train listening and then expect that you will stop training listening, and then start training speaking in the next month and stop training listening. Doesn't work like that. You should be training all of that, and then, but just let's say when in this month I'm gonna focus more on speaking, you should still be devoting time to listening, but like 15 minutes or something a day, but at least some time. As for the business professionals, right, you could think they're less pressured for time, but that's not really true, because you have to understand, why would you need the language if you need it for your job? It's either because your language command is too low for the language required, for the language level required, or you want to move to another country and that's why you want to learn the language, right? So like, why would you want to move to another country? Well, it's either because you like the country or because the salary there is higher. So meaning you are still motivated by money, and depending on how quickly you learn how quickly you learn the language, you will be able to move sooner or later, right? So like this time period is determined by how quickly you learn the language. And so it is in your interest to actually learn it sooner. So in that case, I would actually still refer you to the same group as regular students who need the language certificate, because at the end you also need a language certificate, to either show it to your employer, or when you request visa or whatever. Right, and then, right, but as for people who simply need it for traveling, I mean, any language for traveling, you can just chill, honestly, because, I mean, if you need English for traveling, you don't even need any grammar, right? You can just use infinitives, or you can use simple words and people will understand you. And from my experience, the worse English you speak when traveling, the better, because many people simply do not understand good English. And that is okay, right? But I'm just saying, don't put on that much pressure onto yourself if you simply want to learn the language for traveling. But also don't expect to learn the language. Like, do not expect that you're gonna master all the constructions, that you're gonna speak fluently if you only need it for vacation. But then also don't claim that you can't speak a language just because you traveled to a country where you spoke the language. I mean, you can't do that, it's your right, but like it's not equal to speaking the language, you know? But anyway, the best way for the holiday survivors would be to learn the vocabulary. You have to picture, like, in what situations could I find myself. Let's say if I go on a vacation, am I going by train or am I going by plane? So if you're going by plane, you're going to be at the airport, so you have to look up the vocabulary you might need at the airport. If you're going by train, you have to look up the vocabulary by the trains that you could use at the train station, etc. Right? So I think the principle here is clear. And then if you what the fuck? You're also the type of person who could use language apps, because I think this is exactly how much of vocabulary you could use, you know, when traveling, because you actually don't need to know much, right? So we figured out, depending on where you are, you will need a different type of vocabulary, and so you can picture where you're gonna be so that you know what you can say or what you might have to say, and then you know how to be prepared for it. For example, if you know you're going to go to a country and you're gonna eat some seafood there, right? You can look up the translation of certain dishes before. I mean, if you already have your preferences, right? Before you go on your vacation, so that I mean, if your goal is actually to practice the language in the country, you know, because otherwise, if you go to a restaurant, you can always get your phone out and then translate the menu, it's no problem. But I know many people, you know, like to go to a country and actually try to speak the language there. So if that is your goal, I would recommend to actually be prepared beforehand and then come to the place and, you know, show what you know. Now let's go back to people who have more serious intentions as for the language and who are actually going to speak the language. You have to understand, if you go to language groups, it's gonna take you a lot longer than when you take a private teacher, because it simply works like that. You have more than if you work with a private teacher, you have more attention focused on you, rather than working in a group. Because when you work in a group, your direct wishes do not get considered. Like, nobody gives a fuck whether you want to learn English for your job or for your promotion or for your traveling somewhere, you know, because they have their goals. Like, if it's a language school, they have my god, I cannot fucking focus for shit. Like, recording videos in the evening is so bad. Right. So if you need English for your job, you have to focus on passive voice, the vocabulary that you mostly need in your job. And you already know certain definitions, right? So just know, okay, so this is what I'm gonna need, and I need to show to my employer in the interview that I know this vocabulary. How am I gonna do that? I'm just gonna fucking learn that text, you know? And I'm gonna show that I know all of the vocabulary, even if you don't, right? You just have to create an illusion of that. But these are just tips on how to pass the interview. But actually, if you focus on learning the language, you are not gonna survive by just preparing, by just learning what you need for your job. Because if your goal is at the end to be fluent, you have to expand your vocabulary and you have to watch more. Because the thing here is, when you watch something that refers to your field only, you kind of restrict yourself in the amount of context, in the type of context that you can encounter when you work with different vocabulary. Because let's say if working with English, it's quite common that one word has multiple definitions. And so when you constantly work with the texts, let's say, of one type, you restrict yourself in seeing similar texts, in seeing other texts containing the same word, but within a different context. Why is it bad? Because you do not learn that this word can be used in another context with another meaning. And so basically you just don't learn language as quickly as you would. That's why it's actually important to read different kinds of articles, and not just the ones, or books, and not just the ones who focus on your field only. Okay, right. And then let's say if you work in a technical sphere, you should focus on the technical vocabulary. On the technical grammar, because there is, let's say, passive voice is commonly used in English, but at the same time, passive voice is more used in technical spheres than in real life, right? I mean, you do use it often, but let's be honest, in technical spheres, it is a lot more used. And so you should make sure that you can use passive voice, right? Because that you know how it works. And I mean, it's a topic that everyone should focus on, but for some people, it's just more important than for other. Okay, as for media, right, as for people preparing for language exams because they want to study at the university, so the first things you should focus on is you have to prepare for topics like environment, health industry, family, hobbies, leisure activities, what else? Career options, or like university. And then how do you prepare for them? You basically go on some news websites and you read their news, and by doing that you expand your vocabulary. After that, after you feel like, okay, I know so much about this stuff, I can talk about it non-stop, right? You start reading academic texts on those topics, and this way you prepare yourself for your future studies at the university. But that is like an overhead level, when you know I'm now completely prepared for my exam and I know I will pass it, and then you pass it and you still have some time left before you begin with your studies. So yeah, okay guys, I hope this video was more or less structured. I honestly am gonna say I'm so fucking tired, and I guess it's the last time of me recording a video in the evening, because I feel like my thoughts are just wandering about and I cannot focus. So yeah, I also tried to record it without script. I mean, I actually do have a script, but I felt like it's so bad and it's actually not what I wanted to say. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you drop a like and you subscribe. Bye bye.